Somewhere between making trucks more comfortable and more profitable, manufacturers quietly took away features that actually worked. Features that were simple, durable, and built for people who used their trucks as tools. People who drove them hard, fixed them themselves, and expected them to last. Not features that were outdated, not features that failed, features that worked perfectly and were removed anyway. In this video, we're counting down 10 of them. Stay until the end, because number 1 is going to hit hard. Let's get into it. Number 10, manual locking hubs. Back in 1948, a man named Arthur Warren developed the first locking hub for surplus World War II Jeeps. The Jeeps lacked a convenient way to disconnect the front drivetrain when four-wheel drive wasn't needed. They kept spinning the front axle constantly, adding drag and wearing components even on paved roads. One solution was elegantly simple. When you didn't need four-wheel drive, you stepped out of the vehicle, walked to each front wheel, and twisted a dial on the hub by hand, physically disconnecting the front wheels from the drivetrain entirely. That meant less mechanical drag, less wear on the front axle and differential, and better fuel economy on the road. For decades, manual locking hubs were standard on every serious four-wheel drive truck built in America. Ford, Chevy, Dodge, and International, they all used them. You got out, you locked the hubs, you engaged the transfer case, and you had four-wheel drive you could actually trust. Simple. Mechanical, bulletproof. You always knew with absolute certainty whether your four-wheel drive was engaged or not, because you did it yourself with your own hands. Then, manufacturers decided drivers shouldn't have to get out of the truck. Automatic hubs arrived through the 1980s, vacuum-operated and electronically controlled systems that were supposed to engage the front wheels automatically when you selected four-wheel drive from inside the cab. Convenient in theory, unreliable in practice. Many Ford and Chevy owners from that era will tell you the same story. The automatic hubs failed at the worst possible moment, stuck in a ditch, mud up to the frame, and the hubs refusing to engage. By the mid-1990s, manual locking hubs had largely disappeared from mainstream light trucks as standard equipment. Today, most trucks use full-time electronic four-wheel drive systems with no hubs at all. The front axle is always spinning whether you need it or not. Aftermarket companies like Warren still sell manual hub conversion kits for modern trucks because drivers keep buying them to replace the electronics that keep failing. Number 9, Dayton spoke wheels. If you've ever seen a vintage commercial truck rolling down the road with what looks like a giant spoked bicycle wheel, those are Dayton wheels. And they were standard on American commercial trucks from the early 1900s all the way through the 1950s and into the 1960s, when disc wheels finally took over. The genius of the Dayton spoke wheel was not how it looked. Although the look was stunning, the genius was repairability. Individual spokes were removable and replaceable in the field. If a driver bent or cracked a spoke on a rough, unpaved road, which happened regularly in an era when most American roads were unpaved, he could carry a handful of spare spokes in the toolbox, pull the damaged one, press in a replacement, and be moving again inside 30 minutes with nothing more than basic hand tools. No flatbed, no dealer, no waiting. Disc wheels replaced them across the commercial truck industry through the 1960s and 1970s. Cheaper and faster to manufacture, easier to balance, and perfectly adequate for most road conditions. But when you damage a disc wheel today, and modern roads find ways to damage them, you replace the entire wheel assembly. There is nothing to repair and nothing to adjust. The spoke wheel gave a working driver a fighting chance on the side of the road. The disc wheel gives you a phone number to call. Number 8, air-powered starters. Here is one that most drivers under 50 have never seen in action, and once you have heard one work, you never forget it. On large diesel trucks from roughly the late 1940s through the 1970s, the engine was started not with an electric motor, but with compressed air. A reservoir of compressed air, already present on the truck to operate the air brakes, was directed into a pneumatic starter that spun the engine over until it fired. The sound it made was completely unique. A rising mechanical whir, sharp and powerful, audible from a block away, followed immediately by the bark of a big diesel coming to life. Drivers who heard that sound every morning for 20 years will tell you nothing has ever replaced it. The practical advantage over electric starters was enormous, especially in cold climates. Electric batteries lose cranking power in freezing temperatures, sometimes dramatically. Compressed air does not care what the thermometer says. As long as the air tank held pressure, the starter would spin the engine reliably in conditions that would leave an electric start truck completely dead. For drivers operating in Minnesota, winters, or high-altitude mountain routes, this was not a minor convenience. It was the difference between starting the truck and not starting it. Air starters gradually gave way to more powerful electric starter motors through the 1970s and 1980s as electrical systems and battery technology improved. They remain in use today on very large marine diesel engines and heavy industrial equipment, but on the highway trucks where they were once a defining sound, they are completely gone. Number 7. Vent windows and quarter windows. Let's set the record straight right now, because this is one of the features that other videos have consistently gotten wrong, and it is exactly the kind of mistake that destroys your credibility with experienced drivers. These were not smokers' windows. That name came much later, and was never the original purpose. The small, triangular window in the front corner of the cab door, pivoting open on a hinge, was a precision ventilation tool designed for every driver, long before anyone associated it with cigarettes. It appeared on American trucks and cars in the early 1930s, and became standard equipment across the industry within a few years because it worked so well. The mechanics were simple and perfect. You cracked the window open a few degrees, and it acted as an air scoop, pulling a directed stream of fresh outside air exactly where you aimed it. At your face, at your feet, across the dash. Unlike opening the main window, which brought in wind noise, rain, and road debris, the vent window gave you precise airflow control without any of those drawbacks. On cold, foggy mornings, drivers used them to circulate just enough air through the cab to clear the windshield faster than any defroster could manage, without losing all the cab heat. Vent windows were phased out of most American trucks through the 1980s as air conditioning became standard equipment. Manufacturers argued they were no longer necessary. Removing them also simplified door construction and reduced production costs, which was likely the more honest reason. In their place came plastic dashboard vents, attached to a blower motor that burns fuel, generates noise, and blows air at whatever fixed angle the designer chose. Old-timers who drove with vent windows for 30 years are still unimpressed. Number 6. Radiator shutter grills. Before electronic engine management systems were sophisticated enough to handle temperature regulation on their own, drivers controlled engine temperature themselves, using a row of adjustable metal louvers mounted directly in front of the radiator, operated by a lever or cable from inside the cab. On a cold morning, you close the shutters to block outside airflow, letting the engine build heat quickly. On a hot day, climbing a long grade with a heavy load, you open them fully to maximize cooling airflow across the radiator. The driver made the call based on conditions. No algorithm, no sensor delay. Radiator shutters were common on commercial trucks from the 1920s through the 1950s, and remained on many working trucks well into the 1960s. As engine thermostats became more reliable and cooling systems more sophisticated, they were gradually phased out. By the late 1960s, they had largely disappeared. Here is what makes old-timers shake their heads. Modern trucks have brought back a version of them. Today's active grille shutters are electronic louvers in the front fascia that open and close automatically, managed by the vehicle's computer primarily to improve aerodynamics and fuel economy. The physical concept is similar to what trucks had 60 years ago, adjustable louvers in front of the radiator, but where the original driver-operated shutters were mainly for thermal management, the modern version serves the computer's aerodynamic calculations, and when the motor fails, it triggers a check engine light, requires dealer-level diagnostic tools, and costs hundreds of dollars in parts to repair. Old-timers who pulled a simple cable to do the same job find this situation genuinely amusing. Number 5. External chrome sun visors. Look at a photograph of a Kenworth or Peterbilt from the late 1940s or 1950s, and you will notice something projecting above the windshield that no truck built after the mid-1960s has a wide, overhanging metal visor, usually finished in chrome or painted body color, jutting forward like the brim of a cap worn over the cab. It worked precisely as it appeared. Low-angle sun, the kind that comes in at dawn and late afternoon, under the eyebrow of the windshield header and directly into the driver's eyes, was blocked completely and consistently. No cardboard clipped to the interior visor. No fumbling with a fold-down sunshade while managing a loaded truck through traffic. No smears from fingers visors trying to block the glare, just permanent, reliable shade across the entire windshield from an angle that interior visors can never reach. External visors were especially valued by long-haul drivers who spent 10 to 14 hours daily behind the wheel. On an east-west route, a driver would face directly into the rising sun for the first hour of every morning run. The external visor made that hour manageable. Without it, drivers were left squinting, adjusting, and occasionally drifting toward the shoulder. Aerodynamic efficiency studies in the late 1950s and 1960s identified the external visor as a source of drag. As fuel economy became a regulatory and competitive priority, it was removed. Inside the cab, a small plastic flip-down visor took its place, one that covers perhaps a quarter of the windshield width and requires a free hand to deploy while driving. Old-timers heading east at 7 in the morning have strong feelings about this particular engineering decision. Number 4, washable cab floors and drain plugs. This one is so simple that it almost sounds too obvious to include, and that is exactly why it belongs on this list, because what replaced it is genuinely worse, and nobody in modern truck design seems to notice or care. Work trucks built from the 1930s through the 1960s and into the early 1970s were designed with the understanding that a working truck interior was going to get dirty. Seriously dirty. Boots caked with mud from a feedlot, grain dust from 3 states of harvest, grease, oil, cattle manure, silage, blood from a deer season. Whatever a working truck owner encountered, it ended up on the floor. The solution was rubber floor mats, minimal trim, and on proper purpose-built work trucks, drain plugs in the floor of the cab. When the interior needed cleaning, you removed the mats, pulled the plugs, ran a garden hose through the cab, and you were done. The whole process took 5 to 10 minutes. Military vehicles retained this design for obvious reasons and kept it for decades. Early Jeeps, military cargo trucks, and purpose-built utility vehicles were engineered from the start with the expectation of regular washouts. Modern light trucks have carpet with padding underneath that holds moisture and breeds mold, electronic modules bolted to the floor under the seats that cannot get wet, plastic trim panels with dozens of small crevices that capture mud and never fully release it, regardless of how long you vacuum. Cleaning a genuinely dirty modern truck interior properly takes an hour with a wet-dry vacuum, detailing brushes, and spray cleaner, and the result is still not as clean as 5 minutes with a garden hose used to achieve. The drain plug was not a primitive feature. It was a correct engineering decision that was replaced with a worse one. Number 3, inline-six engine platforms. If you want to start an argument that will last 3 hours at any truck stop in rural America, walk in and announce that modern turbocharged V6 engines are better than the old inline-sixes, then stand near the door. The most celebrated example in American light truck history is the Ford 300 cubic inch inline-six, 4.9 liters, introduced in the 1965 Ford F-Series and built continuously for 31 years until the final engine came off the line in 1996. 31 years of production. That is what happens when an engine is so right for its purpose that there is no compelling reason to replace it. The Ford 300 was not a performance engine, and it was never meant to be. In its early years, it produced 170 horsepower on the gross rating scale used at the time, a measurement taken without accessories like alternators and water pumps. When the industry switched to the more realistic SAE net power standard in 1972, the same engine rated closer to 100 horsepower, not because anything changed in the engine, but because the measuring method changed. By the fuel-injected versions of the late 1980s and 1990s, net output had reached 150 horsepower. What the engine was built for was torque, low-end torque, available from idle, without revving the engine hard to access it. The Ford 300 delivered up to 260 pound-feet of torque at very low RPM. It also featured 7 main bearings supporting the crankshaft, a specification more common in industrial diesel engines than passenger vehicle power plants, which is a significant reason why engines running reliably past 300,000 miles were not rare. They were expected. The Ford 300 also powered wood chippers, generators, ski lifts, and UPS delivery trucks for the same reasons. It simply would not stop working. The inline-six disappeared from American light trucks in the 1990s as V6 and V8 engines took over. The V6 is more compact and fits modern engine bays better, but it sacrifices the inherent mechanical balance of 6 cylinders in a straight line, firing in perfect sequence. In American light trucks, that engine is gone, and the gap it left has never been fully filled. Number 2. Hand throttle dash lever. Long before electronic cruise control existed, American work trucks came equipped with a simple pull knob on the dashboard, a hand throttle. You pulled it outward to a position, and the engine held that RPM steadily until you pushed it back in. No electronics, no programming, just a cable connected to the carburetor, doing exactly what you asked it to do, for as long as you needed it. The hand throttle solved a problem that electronic cruise control still does not address: stationary engine speed management. Running a power takeoff shaft to operate a hydraulic pump, a grain auger, a winch, an irrigation pump, or a wood chipper requires maintaining a specific engine, RPM continuously, sometimes for hours. You cannot do that with your foot. Modern cruise control disengages the moment you touch the brake or the clutch. The hand throttle let a driver set the exact RPM needed for the attached equipment, lock it in, get out of the cab, and work, with the engine running steadily at whatever speed the job required. In cold weather, it let you set a fast idle for warm-up. On long, straight routes, it gave your right leg a genuine rest. The hand throttle was removed as electronic cruise control became standard, and as emissions regulations made manually held open throttle positions more complicated to certify. The electronic PTO speed control that eventually replaced it costs several $100s when it fails. The original cable and knob cost a few dollars to manufacture, could be repaired with basic tools, and lasted the life of the truck. Number 1, steel bumpers. This is the one. For the entire history of the American pickup truck through the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, truck bumpers were steel. Not decorative steel, not steel look plastic, with a steel subframe behind it. Heavy, thick, fully welded steel, bolted solidly to the frame, designed to absorb real impacts from real work. The front bumper of a 1975 Ford F-150, a 1978 Chevy C10, or a 1980 Dodge Power Wagon was not a styling feature. It was a tool. You used it to push a stuck vehicle out of a ditch. You bolted a winch to it and pulled yourself out of mud. You backed up to a loading dock or a field gate without calculating clearances. If something hit the bumper took the hit. That was its entire purpose. Beginning in the late 1980s, steel bumpers were replaced with painted plastic fascias and composite structures. Three forces drove this simultaneously. Federal fuel economy standards incentivized every pound of weight reduction possible. Pedestrian safety regulations required energy-absorbing front structures that deformed predictably in low-speed impacts, and the integration of parking sensors, backup cameras, radar systems, and adaptive cruise control required housing that technology in the front fascia, something steel bumpers could not easily accommodate. The result is the modern truck bumper. It looks substantial in a parking lot. The first time something contacts it, the education begins. The plastic cracks, sensors misalign, and repair bills arrive. And on trucks with multiple embedded sensors, even a minor impact can become an expensive repair. Aftermarket steel bumper manufacturers, ARB, Warn, Fab Fours, Road Armor, and others have built substantial businesses. Owners are voluntarily spending thousands of dollars to put back on their trucks what the factory removed. That market exists because the need never went away. The trucks changed, the work did not. 10 features, all of them genuinely gone from the trucks most of us drive today. All of them removed for reasons that served manufacturers, regulators, or accountants more than they served the people actually using these trucks to do real work. If you drove with any of these, if your first truck had a vent window or a hand throttle or a bumper you could actually use, drop it in the comments. We want to hear the stories. And if there is something we missed that deserves a place on this list, tell us that too. Subscribe if you want to see it. See you in the next one.